Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for tonight's class and those that were able to make it and those that are volunteering for Easter services on Sunday. We ask your blessing upon those specifically tonight. And we pray that you would guide our thoughts tonight, guide our minds, guide our hearts, and open our entire self to you and your truth and the reality of the world you made and who you are. So help us to understand you better and, in effect, to draw closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so tonight we're talking about, if you remember, where we have our big flow of thought, we're on premise 3, that the observations of the universe are best explained by intelligence or an intelligent designer. And so we've come to the point in the class where we're either going to be looking at physics tonight or astrophysics or both. And so I guess the question to the class is, given that tonight is the 11th week of the class, and I gave you the 10 plus or minus 2 scenario at the beginning, if I cover physics, the argument that could be made from physics tonight, then we wouldn't get as far along in the astrophysics and cosmology argument. In other words, we'd have to push that back to next week. So my plan was initially to cover physics in the first half, to give you basically a summary of the outline I just gave you in about half an hour or so, 40 minutes maybe. And then in the second half to start the cosmology argument, and which will continue 2 weeks from now because next week we have off. Because I'll be teaching in Florida next week. So then we'll have to pick up the cosmology argument and finish it off the 12th week of the class. If we did that, we wouldn't be doing any of the last part of the argument, which is basically just see how the biblical understanding of the origins of the universe and the earth and life correspond and collaborate with scientific finds, which we were going to get to at the end. So I guess the question is, do you want to go 12 weeks or do you want to go 14 weeks? And usually Bob would say go as long as you want because he has no limit. That's the whole thing with these classes. But I guess the question is that going to pose a strain and a stress and a disturbance in your life if we did try to do 14 weeks? And are you going to be dissatisfied and disappointed because of the longer class period?
As long as the tuition doesn't go up.
Because it's expensive now, right? You're barely scraping by. So does anyone have any objection to going 14 weeks, which would basically be to the end of April? Because I could give you that last couple outlines. It's about 30 pages, and you could just take it home and read it, and that could be like the end of the class on the 12th week. Or would you want to come back for 2 more classes and experience it in terms of a lecture?
Come back. 2 more classes.
Okay, any objections to that? Okay, so that's how we'll proceed. So what we'll do tonight is we'll cover the physics argument, but again, it will be kind of a brief argument because this argument is not that strong of an argument. In other words, the argument from the complexity in the cell and the argument from cosmology are very strong arguments, and they're very compelling. But this one is a softer argument, but it's helpful. It's very helpful, and you'll see why. So I just want to give you that disclaimer at the moment because I don't want you to come away thinking, well, gosh, that wasn't really convincing enough for me to believe in the existence of God, It's kind of like it just adds to the case. It just adds to the compelling case that we're trying to build overall. So let's see, Rachel, you need a handout. Yeah, I think he can give you one. If anyone comes in late, maybe you could put those somewhere back there. Okay, so on page 1, ID is inferred in classical physics when observing the transparency and beauty of the universe. Okay? So when we're talking about ID, intelligent design, is inferred. Remember how we talked about an inference to the best explanation. And classical physics, we'll talk about what that is, when observing the transparency and beauty of the universe. So when we say transparency and beauty, what do we actually mean by that? Well, we'll get into that. So this is kind of the premise or the sub-premise that supports premise 3, which is in the header above. Now, to introduce this topic, we consider the universe, and we look at the universe and we start asking questions. How? How did this universe come to be? How does it do this? How does it do that? How does it flow? How does it function? We start asking these how questions. And this is basically what physics tries to do. Physics is a discipline of science that answers the how questions of describing reality, how reality behaves, how reality flows. So it takes a physical phenomena and it tries to answer the question, the how questions. How does this behave? How does this work? Okay? So that's basically what classical physics is essentially trying to do. And over time we've asked the how questions and we've discovered fascinating answers into understanding how the universe works and how it behaves, how it flows, how it functions. As time passes and physics continues to reveal a world to us that is awe-inspiring, we have forgotten the second question of the curious mind. So in the past, we've asked the first question, what naturally causes the physical features of the universe? That's kind of the first question of physics. We've forgotten to ask, are the physical features of the universe only natural? Okay, and I'll explain that second question. But it seems that the curious types of people would be intellectually unsatisfied just to stop at the first question, how the universe works. There's another question that it seems that if we're really intellectually curious, we would ask the second question. Is there anything true of the physical universe that's not natural, that's not physical? Could other descriptions be true of the universe that are non-physical descriptions? So that's the idea here. So H, could anything else be said of physical reality that does not describe it in natural terms, but is still true of nature itself? That is, what non-natural descriptions, if any, are true of the physical universe? Or another way to ask this is, what properties does the physical universe exemplify that are non-natural? And so again, physics reveals and describes nature, but is there more to nature that physics cannot reveal and describe that is still true of the nature? So you get the question, what else could be said of the physical universe that we could say in non-physical terms? So we say, yes, there are in fact properties true of the physical universe that are non-natural but still true of the natural state of affairs. So what we find is that science itself does not explain the mathematical intelligibility of the physical world. And this was a quote by a famous quantum physicist, John Polkinghorne, who has done great work in the last 50 years in the UK. And he says that this non-natural property, this is a non-natural property, this mathematical intelligibility. And science cannot describe this mathematical intelligibility. And we can refer to this mathematical intelligibility as the transparency of the universe, meaning that we can see through, essentially. We can see past a barrier, if you will, and get past that and understand the universe. So transparency could be thought of as comprehensibility or rational intelligibility. So when we're talking about transparency, if you think of a shower door, that's kind of like semi-transparent or semi-opaque, if you will. You can kind of see through a shower door. A window would be fully transparent. A wall would be opaque, right? So when we're talking about physical phenomena of the universe or the earth, we're talking about something that is transparent to us. Us meaning intelligent minds. We can describe the physical universe with math. We can use mathematical equations to describe the universe. And that's the idea of physics. And so that transparency, or what physics is as a discipline, gives us access to the universe because we're intelligent minds and the universe itself is transparent, and it gives us answers we can understand, if you will. So we'll hash that out a little bit more here shortly. So C, that is, the universe is transparent, comprehensible, and rationally intelligible to us. Okay? Now, another non-natural property that could be said of the universe is its beauty. So beauty can be said to emerge from or supervene on the physical universe. That is, beauty is not something that physics can describe, but is based on the same physical universe. So we'll talk more about beauty in a sec, but just to introduce that idea is that when you have a physical, say I have a plant up here, a potted plant, and someone could say, well, that plant is green. It's 2 feet tall. Its branches extend 1 foot out in each direction. It's got some flowers that grow off of it. The flowers are 4 inches in diameter, and then there's a core to the flower. I'm not sure what it's called, and that's 1 inch in diameter. You could start describing that plant with scientific terms: size, weight, density, things like that. But someone could also say that plant has the property of beauty. It's a beautiful plant. And someone could say the plant is beautiful because it just is. And they would describe it that way. So someone is saying that plant has the property beautiful, but science does not give us the ability to describe the beauty. Science only gives us the ability to describe the physical properties: size, weight, density, things like that. But we can still say something is true of that plant that science does not enable us to describe. So, both with transparency and beauty, these are true features of the universe, but are non-natural properties. Overall, the physical state of affairs of the universe possesses the non-natural properties of beauty and transparency. And so far, I've just asserted that these non-natural properties are in the universe. I still need to argue that this is the case. So I'm just saying, like, this is where we're going tonight, okay? So if you don't like this argument, then I'm sorry. But I think it's interesting enough to present. And some apologists will use this. And so I want you to be aware of it because it falls under the branch of scientific apologetics. Now, the goal of this class tonight, or at least this first half, is to answer these questions. Is the universe actually transparent that I'm asserting it is? And is the universe actually beautiful? I can't just make that statement. I have to show it to be true. So, if so, what theory best explains the cause of the transparency and the cause of the beauty of the universe? What theory explains these properties? Is it physical necessity? Is it chance? Or is it design? And we're going to argue that design is the best explanation of the transparency and beauty of the universe. And when I say universe, I mean anything in the universe, including us in this classroom here. I'm saying everything. Space and Earth and the ocean and the deserts, everything. So this is basically the argument. The universe is transparent. The universe is beautiful. Intelligent design is inferred as the best explanation, as other explanations are inadequate, of these features of the universe. And in naturalism, one would not expect to find that the universe is transparent or beautiful. Now that last little premise there is not very important to the overall flow of that argument, or just the first three. But it's like when I say that the other explanations are inadequate, kind of trickling on here is this idea that naturalism, if naturalism is true, and we look around in the universe and try to describe it using physics and math, we wouldn't necessarily say that it's beautiful. We would come up with all kinds of other descriptions or mathematical equations to describe it And those wouldn't be beautiful. Those would be all a bunch of gibberish. So we could talk about that shortly here. Now, are there any questions at this point? Does anyone here have a physics background? Does anyone here know what physics is? What is physics?
Well, part of it is the study of motion, force, and things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, right. So, to help us understand a little bit more about physics, let's talk about that right now. So down there at X, or 10, to get ourselves a little bit familiar with this, to kind of make this argument work for us. Physics is something from everyday life. It's everywhere. So when we're talking about physics, I'm not talking about something abstract. I'm talking about real science. This is considered the hard science. Like there's basically two hard sciences. There's chemistry and physics. Biology's, I guess you could say, is a hard science, but it's debatable. And the soft sciences would be like, you know, I don't know, psychology or something like that. Something, or psychiatry, something a little less experimental, if you will. So this is a very important scientific enterprise. There's really the big three. This is one of the big three. So when we're talking about physics, we're talking about magnets on a fridge. We're talking about a car's heat and sparks. We're talking about air conditioning units. We're talking about every structure. I designed buildings, so I can tell you right now that designing buildings for a living to resist earthquake forces is all about physics. Everything about it is the pushing, the movement of the ground, the thrust of the ground in one direction, and the building's capacity to resist that thrust force in the other direction. The light from the TV, for instance. You got a TV turned on, there's light emerging from that. Sound from our boom box. If you've got a 1980s boom box, like Steve certainly has, and he's got all kinds of music to play on it, which he will tell you about if you ask him. My job, like I just mentioned, structural engineering. So interestingly, we can realize the parallels, this is just a side note, between physics and the supernatural realms. So forces from the supernatural realm move us spiritually, so to speak. So when God, the Holy Spirit, is moving on us, or we're having an encounter with the Lord, He's speaking to us, these sorts of things. These things move us spiritually. I mean, we are pushed. We feel the force, if you will, of God. And the same thing is true of the natural realm. We are moved naturally when the earthquake comes. It pushes us in an upward direction and in a horizontal direction. So these sorts of forces are at play in the supernatural and in the physical realm. So there's an interesting parallel between the forces, if you will, if you just think about forces. And that's basically what classical physics describes. It describes forces in motion. So branches of physics would be classical physics, microscopic physics, and cosmological physics. And then you can kind of get a better description by reading that there, but that's kind of the idea, is that you got big motion particles like me, throwing something across the room. That's kind of classical physics. It's going to have rotation, it's going to have a velocity, it's going to have an acceleration, it's going to have all these time markers that you can attribute to the motion, that sort of thing. Microscopic physics, behavior of particle change. This is where you start talking about quantum physics. And then you have cosmological physics, which deals with the space-time, things like that. So we'll get into that a little later. Now, specific areas of physics are mechanics, motion, work energy, momentum, fluid mechanics. And when you're talking about waves, you're talking about wave motion, sound waves, superposition of standing waves. When you're talking about another branch like thermodynamics, you're talking about temperature and heat changes, the first law of thermodynamics, kinetic theory of gases, entropy, and the second law of thermodynamics, electromagnetism, relativity theory, quantum physics. So these are all kind of branches of physics. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what kind of stuff this field would talk about. And so when I was in college studying to be an engineer, I had to take all these classes except for basically relativity theory and quantum physics, but I had to learn all this stuff. And some of it I'm never using, and I will never use. I haven't used, I won't use, but obviously a lot of it I do. And so this is kind of just to give you a sense of what this field is, if you don't have any clue. So mechanical engineers, mechanics, or any type of engineering would utilize physics and apply it. So engineers would apply physics, if you will. Apologetics, if you will, applies philosophy, or things that philosophy will speak to. So I'm kind of into the applied sciences or the applied philosophy. And we'll see if I go into more of an academic thing in the future, but right now I'm into this sort of stuff. Now I'm giving you that little thing about myself. I don't like talking about myself, but I'm trying to give you just a sense of why this is important. Physics is a very, very important thing. The Higgs boson thing, dealing with the quantum realm. I mean, these are major breakthroughs of our time. So if you're not really clear on what physics is, I just want to give you a sense of how relevant it is to our lives. Now, so the first premise, again, the universe is transparent. When we say transparent, we mean comprehensible and intelligible, and that's at the bottom of page 5. Now, that's what we're going to argue for now, that the universe is in fact comprehensible and transparent. Okay? And so there's a picture of Albert Einstein on your next page, and he said this: the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. So Albert Einstein, a long, long time ago, made that statement. And he was basically expressing a big point, is that it's mind-boggling that we can understand the universe, that the universe is actually clear enough to us, reasonable enough to us for us to grasp it, to know it, to describe it. That is mind-boggling. It could be completely opaque. We could have no access to it at all. So Einstein made this very important remark a long time ago, and it relates to apologetics, because it turns out that we can formulate mathematical equations to describe the behavioral phenomena of the universe. We can figure it all out using math. And that's what physics is doing. So these are the equations of physics, if you will. They write them on the board, and you can describe reality with math. That's why math is so important. A lot of times we have no idea why we're doing math, but the idea is that it relates to physics, and physics helps us understand the world. Now, these equations are modeling what is happening in the actual universe. So, he's John Lennox. He's a mathematician and philosopher in the UK. He says that, as the example of Newton's theory shows, it is not only the fact that the universe is intelligible, which is amazing, it is the mathematical nature of that intelligibility which is remarkable. So the math itself is a window to the mechanisms and systems of the natural order. The math itself, it's like the Bible, and it reveals God to us. So math is like, and physics is kind of like that. It's our written way to describe this reality that's a little bit, we just see it, but we don't know really what's happening until we write it down, until we put it down on paper. Now, I'm giving you here a bunch of physics equations, and I don't want you to memorize these. I don't want you to really dwell on them, but it's just to kind of whet your appetite on what these things look like when we're talking about physics equations. So Newton's law of universal gravitation. Okay, this is basically your standard gravitational equation. And you could see it there. I'm not going to describe all these or spend a lot of time on them. I'm just introducing them to you, because if you see there's a force there, the force that's pushing us to the Earth, for instance, and other cosmic forces, when we're talking about gravity and the cosmos, this is the equation that basically describes the general motion of gravity. Now, you can continue to talk about Newton's laws of motion here in the, if you keep going on the second page, Newton's laws of motion, you have the first law of motion, the second law of motion, and the third law of motion. And so I'm not putting them here in equations, but I'm kind of describing them for you. And then you have Maxwell's equations. And so Maxwell was very helpful in understanding electromagnetism and the electromagnetic force. When you have a magnet that oscillates between a I can't remember the word for them. Conductors, I believe. If the magnet's oscillating back and forth, then you're going to be able to generate electricity because of the electromagnetic, or because of the magnetic field. And so it causes electrons to move in the conductor, which pushes electrons out through a series of circuits and wires, which causes electricity to come out on, say, a light bulb. Or that's what electricity is. It's the movement of the electrons, if you will. That's a very poor definition, so don't quote me on that. But I'm just kind of giving you a sense of this is interesting stuff. You know, we use electricity all the time. It all comes from physics. So again, there's a bunch of equations here. You can keep going. The next page, you have all these things that got worked out with Newton's laws, with the electromagnetic force, Faraday's laws. He contributed to that. And then you have Einstein, who started getting all crazy on us, talking about relativity theory, special relativity, general relativity, if you keep going. This idea of event horizon, we can understand what's happening beyond in the horizon and how to, what we're seeing. And then when we're talking about not just the horizon on Earth, but I'm talking about black holes in outer space, you know, that sort of stuff. So it gets really, really wild really fast. So when you take a year of physics, you realize that you're just scratching the surface, and it's just baby stuff. So when I took physics, it was very, very difficult. But you just start to realize that what you're doing is nothing compared to what a physics major is doing, for instance. So I have a lot of respect for those guys. Now, these equations. This is on page, what page is this? 9. These equations are our view of the world and universe and give knowledge of the universe. So yes, the universe, the world, universe is transparent to us and not closed off from our grasp. So we actually have the capabilities to know it and understand it for some reason, and we are on a privileged planet to view the world and universe. We can view it, and this in and of itself is amazing. So any questions at this point?
Yes, what's meant by privilege? Is that a philosophical assertion?
That's a good question, actually. The privileged planet is this idea proposed by J. Wesley Richards and Guillermo Gonzalez, I believe. And they made a great DVD about it, actually. So it's very accessible. But they are saying that and we're actually going to get into this later, but I can tell you now, because they're saying that because we sit on a spiral arm in our galaxy, and the location of the spiral, the area that we sit along the spiral arm is such that there's not a lot of dust around us, we can actually we can see through the dust, or see past it because it's minimal, with our telescopes, and understand the universe and the behavior of the cosmos. So the privilege that we have is unique to have that viewing perspective. It seems as if somebody put us on a planet like this with that unique perspective, because it's uncanny that you would have intelligent minds in a location where they can start making intelligent observations of the universe. And it just so turns out that you and I are living today at a time when that technology is at hand, and we have the ability to access that view with the technology. So not only are we on a privileged planet because we have that position, but it seems logical to conclude that we were put here for a reason, that there was a mind behind us being here so that we could see the universe eventually and do what with that? How would we respond, in other words? What would we conclude? And perhaps it would be that God is the maker of it, and we could identify and recognize His handiwork and care in and design and power in creating the universe, and we would stand in awe and give him more worship and glory. So that's the idea of the privileged planet.
A little difficult because that term generally could mean a couple things. It could be privileged in the sense of it could be exceptional, just mathematically exceptional. It's not bringing more any chance, but that privilege can also be talking about being subject that is providing the opportunity for this continued generosity, or transparency. Is that more real?
We're privileged in the sense that we're not just fortunate, we're not just lucky to happen to be in that spot, but that God has put us there to give us that privilege to be able to do things around survive in the location that we're at. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but is that the position of these two guys that we
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's helpful. That's the idea with the classroom kind of rotated tables like this, is so there's a little bit of interaction amongst you guys. So feel free to conversate here. But that's right. Yeah, I mean, we're not privileged in the sense that God's discriminating against the other aliens on other planets and they can't see stuff. You know, it's not that kind of like, you know, talking about gay marriage a lot this week. It's not like that. Like, we're privileged because we happen to like people of the opposite sex or something. It's that we're privileged because we have this dual thing, that we can see it and we're intelligent enough to see it. Yeah.
Is that exceptional, by the way, in our known observation of planets and so forth, that we have a real lack of grasp just from it?
Yeah, it is. It's very exceptional. When you add up all of these unique features of our position, like certain radiation not being there, that the Earth has the materials to develop a telescope, all of those things, yeah, that there's not too much light from the sun, there's just the right amount of light, all of these little things, and we're going to talk about this in great detail in the second half. So, but yes, it is exceptional.
It seems almost as if someone had created an opportunity to see beyond things that are immediate.
Things are immediate. Yeah.
Immediately at a grasp.
Yeah. A long-term purpose. Is that what you mean?
There's an expansive opportunity for experience.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's mind-boggling when you start thinking about it. And hopefully some of this will kind of open up the mind if you haven't considered this before. Has anybody heard of the concept of the privileged planet before that was brought up? A couple of us? Okay. All right. Now, just to continue this line of thought, if the universe was opaque, for instance, this is what a closed universe would look like. It would be opaque. One would never seem to get far in his research. After thousands of years of humanity, we would most likely be stuck in what we would consider prehistoric times, playing with fire, because we can't really have scientific progress if the universe isn't open and transparent to us, for us to describe it. So our technology that we enjoy so much, and including the atheist who's listening and rocking it out to his iPod at the gym, even that guy is dependent on the fact that the universe is not closed. Because our technology is dependent on scientific progress. So he's a benefactor of this great idea of the universe being open and transparent to us. And we can describe it, and that way science can progress. So there have been many physicists who have come along and made scientific breakthroughs because they were able to reach out into the universe and pull something out. And so we can say that we have access to see and understand the universe through physics. And so yes, the universe is transparent. And that's the idea here. Okay? Now, the universe is beautiful is the second premise to this, essentially. So, to prove that the universe is beautiful, all I'm going to do is just say these few things, and then we'll have to move on. We'll take a break. I have yet to come across a person who thinks that the world and universe is not beautiful. I don't know if you've ever met someone who says this universe that we find ourselves in, is in fact hideously ugly. Have you ever met someone who thinks that? No, you haven't. Why? Because when people look at pictures from space, they're usually in awe. It's like, oh wow, that's really cool, at the least, right? And you yourself, when you have a hard day and somehow the NASA channel gets flipped on, aren't you just like, whoa? And it just throws you back and you kind of stop thinking about your stress. There's something about the universe that's drawing, inviting, welcoming, at least visually speaking, and it's very hard to remain in our little problematic, work day, if you will, when we see pictures from space. Something pulls us into this other realm. There's something to it that is drawing. It's wooing, if you will. There's a beauty to it. So beauty is all around and can be said to emerge from or supervene on the universe. Now, I'm not going to say that beauty is in the matter of the universe or in the physical elements of the universe. I'm going to say beauty is a property that emerges from the matter, if you will. Okay, so what I mean by that is beauty is an objective property of the universe. It's not in the universe. So be careful how you say this. If you're talking to an atheist or you're talking online with somebody, be smart in your wording. Beauty is not in the universe. It's something that can be said of the universe. So the universe possesses the objective property of beauty. Now, something is objectively beautiful, when there are no minds that consider it or view it. Its beauty is still there. So when there's no one thinking about the universe's beauty, it's still beautiful. Okay? That's what objective beauty is. Or something that is objectively evil is still evil, even though there's nobody thinking about how evil it is or talking about how evil it is. In other words, if I went tonight and drove down to TJ and went further and found some little village, and I started going into some of these villagers' homes, and I started killing people and mass murdering folks and slicing babies' necks. Okay? And then I came back and went to work the next day. And maybe no one knew about it. Okay? I disposed of the bodies, burned them, whatever. I mean, this is terrible, right? This is disgusting. It's absurd. But that is pure evil if I was never caught, if no one ever knew about it, and I never thought about it again. It's terrible. It's disgusting. But you would say that act in and of itself was evil. It was an evil act. Now, the matter of the people and the knife and the cutting, the motions, that can't be described with physics, and it's the evil is not in the matter. There's something true of the act itself that's evil. We can say it's evil because the act itself, there's an objective evil that supervenes from the action of killing or emerges from, supervenes on or emerges from the action. So in that sense, the evil is there, it's real, it's present, but it's not in the people's bodies or in my motion. It's not physically in my hand or the knife, but it's still objectively evil. Now, this is the same idea with beauty. If I go look at the universe and then not think about it for 3 years, that universe is still beautiful. It's that way objectively if no one ever saw it. If none of us on the entire planet thought of or looked at the universe in any telescopes or looked up at night, the universe would still be beautiful. So that's the idea. The difference between objective and subjective we could talk about all night, but that's kind of the basic point. In other words, on 4, objective beauty is not dependent on personal or subjective judgments, but is true of the phenomena. In this sense, beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. The eye of the beholder is a subjective kind of thing that people say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In this sense, when we're talking about this kind of objective beauty, it's not subjective. It's not in the eye of the beholder. It's true of that thing itself. Now, entities are objectively beautiful because they exemplify the universal property of beauty. It emerges from, they manifest it, they exemplify it, if you will. This beauty seems to point to something beyond ourselves, as we are not the givers of the beauty, but the discoverers of it. So we don't go look at the universe and say, that's beautiful, and when I say that's beautiful, I'm now imparting beauty to it. I'm not saying that's what we're doing. I'm saying that's beautiful because I discovered the beauty that's of the universe. Now, C.S. Lewis does a brilliant job of spelling this out in his book, The Weight of Glory. No, sorry, The Abolition of Man. His book, The Abolition of Man. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it, because what he's trying to do is explain that when society teaches their children to identify things as good or evil or beautiful or ugly, and saying that however you say it is what it is, or what you use to describe something makes that thing what you described it to be, that, he's saying, is really bad. We're going down the tubes as a society if we start doing that. And that's exactly what has taken place over the last 75 years since he wrote that, is that the postmodern world, we've now used our language to attribute something, some property to another thing. And so what someone says, this narrative, now you hear this word a lot, this narrative could be rejected depending on what culture or subculture or class you're talking to. So anyway, that's another big conversation, but I'm just trying to differentiate the idea between subjective beauty and objective beauty. Now, some things could be, let me finish this last 2 points. I'll just read it instead of describing. This beauty seems to point to something beyond ourselves, as we are not the givers of the beauty, but the discoverers of it. And lastly, not all parts of the universe are objectively beautiful, and not all parts or creatures of the earth are objectively beautiful, but as a whole, one could say that the universe exemplifies beauty. So in other words, someone could say that these things over here, Jeremy, are not beautiful. They are in fact ugly. You know, I'm looking at these bugs, I'm looking at these cockroaches or something, and it's just nasty. I mean, look at them, they're sick. And every time I see stuff from the ocean, like, you know, that aren't the normal kind of fish that we like to see and eat, every time I see stuff, it grosses me out. And I'm thinking to myself, God, that thing is ugly, like objectively ugly, you know. I try to kind of use that thinking, and I say, God, how can you make something objectively ugly like this? I don't know. I don't know if God said, well, we need to have a few ugly things just to show off all the good, beautiful things I made, just, you know, to kind of give everybody a comparison. I don't know what God was thinking, but what I'm saying is that that's kind of rare, though. You know, these things are not often seen by us, and we could say maybe it's like 1% of the whole universe. The bugs on the planet Earth are definitely a lot less than 1% of the whole universe in terms of the physical world that exists. I mean, they're not even 1% of our planet. 0.0001%, you know, something like that. They're nothing. We barely even notice them. So in other words, someone could say that these things are ugly, therefore, Jeremy, your argument sucks that, you know, the universe is objectively beautiful because it has ugly things in it. Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying as a whole, the universe is beautiful. And I mean everything in the universe, including stuff on planet Earth. There's a question?
Yes. How do you determine that it is beautiful?
I think it's kind of this one of these things that philosophers call first principles. It has this a priori appearing to quality to it, where it appears to us as objectively beautiful. It's a very simplistic intuition. I don't need an argument. I don't need premises. I don't need experimentation. It's not a posteriori, which is the last Latin for after the fact or after an experiment or observation. It's a priori, means kind of innate knowing. Yeah. It's like if the Holy Spirit came and knocked me over, for instance, I would know it's the Holy Spirit, or an earthquake. But, you know, if none of you are falling over and it's just me, it's probably the Holy Spirit, you know, something like that. Like, it's just intuition. I know it was God, you know, that sort of thing. Or I had a direct awareness of God. It's kind of like that. I have a direct awareness of beauty. Question, yes?
Would it then, like the natural, say, kind of what we talked about in the class where you have these like environments and
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that answer just gave over as my answer as well, but that has been my question along. Doesn't what you're saying fall more into the psychology part of thinking?
Yeah.
It's not hard science.
That would be definitely a good response if you're someone who holds to naturalism and you're sitting in this class. You could say, hey, you know, this is just your random chemicals in your brain firing around, electrochemical responses. And it's just telling you to say that this thing's beautiful because you've had maybe experiences as a child where you were taught that stuff is beautiful. And so it's this psychological thing or this inherited thing in your genes, whatever. Yeah, that could be made. That argument could be made. I would say honestly, look at me and tell me that universe is not beautiful. You know, and you could talk to anybody from any part of the planet, you know, and they would probably say the same thing, that it is beautiful. Especially when you compare it to something like an ugly bug or sea creature. You know, say, okay, you tell me that thing is because you grew up in some weird jungle in India or something, that you think that thing is beautiful and that's not. You know, you tell me that and you try to present that. And someone could say, well, there's some cultures in Africa that say the white person is the devil, you know, or is this ugly thing. White is ugly. White is identified with ugly. And in Western cultures, maybe something that's dark is identified with bad or evil or, you know, ugly or something. So there's this cultural perspective. Someone could use that. And I can identify with that argument. I say, okay, sure. But at the end of the day, are you going to tell me that universe or this sunset or something is not beautiful? And I don't think that person's going to do that. I think you got to challenge them personally on that. Now, there's this other aspect. If you skip down to D, where we talk about beauty, and I'm not going to cover this because we're going to take a break, and then I'll kind of wrap it up when we come back. This whole conversation, but this idea that these math equations are beautiful. The equations themselves are beautiful. So we're talking about two different types of beauty here when we're using this argument. One is the beauty of the universe, or that the universe exemplifies, but we're also talking about the equations themselves, the math itself. Can you believe that? We're talking about math being beautiful. And so what some apologists will do is talk about the beauty criterion that physicists use when they arrive at a theory or a description of the universe. So if a physicist finds something to be true of his experiment and he wants to kind of describe it mathematically, he may write an equation like Newton did and say something like, this is just to describe what a force is. F equals ma. That's mass, that's acceleration, right? And what is that? Force. Acceleration. So the idea here is there's something simplistic about this equation. There's something beautiful to it. And so what they do is they say, if my equation, when I do all these experiments and I've conducted 10 years worth of research, if I arrive at my equation and my equation's not simple and beautiful, then I may have done something wrong. But if it satisfies the criterion of simple and beautiful, then I'm most likely right in my theory describing reality. I kid you not. If you look down to number 5 on page 12, Paul Dirac, 1902 to 1984, very famous physicist. He says that, he basically, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the idea that the more aesthetically pleasing a theory is, the better it is. Naturally, this criterion does not stand up to the real test, whether or not predictions of a given theory agree with observational tests. But considering that it is a purely aesthetic quality that is being tested, many of the most successful theories, like special relativity, general relativity, quantum electrodynamics, all of these successful theories match the criterion particularly well. So just because you come up with an ugly equation or a big equation or with a bunch of funky fudge factors, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's wrong. But what they're saying is that when you arrive at a nice, simple, beautiful equation, it may most likely be right, because all these other really big-time equations that they've discovered about relativity theory, gravitational force, all that stuff, they all have this property of being simple and beautiful. And so that's kind of the idea here. And that's what Occam's razor is all about, that the simplest explanation is most likely the best one. And so that's kind of what I'm saying there. And then there's a lot more that I'm talking about with recognizability and beauty, and you could read that on your own time. But if you keep going down to the bottom, or down to the middle of page 14, to conclude this little conversation, overall, in two different respects, we recognize beauty in the physical universe and in the math of physics. So in that respect, we can detect beauty in the universe and in the math of the physics. So why don't we take a little break, and I'll kind of wrap up this discussion when we come back, and then we'll start talking about cosmology. Okay? So let's take a 5-minute break, and if you haven't chatted with some folks in here yet, I would highly recommend that you kind of work your way around the room and chat with some people and have some, I don't know if anybody brought snacks, but I don't think so, yeah. Okay, so this is kind of a more chatting break rather than an eating break. So we'll get to that outline that Rachel is passing out. Thank you, Rachel. Shortly. But to conclude this conversation, without going into all of the rest of the details, we want to understand what best explains the universe being transparent and beautiful. What theory best explains that? Is physical necessity a good theory for that? Is chance a good theory for that? Or is design? What is the best theory? So the naturalist, the atheist, will try to say that naturally, natural causes produced this universe, so it has to be due to physical necessity or chance, because the universe came to be the way it is because of natural forces acting on other natural phenomena. So, is that a valid theory? Does that explain the intelligibility of the universe and the beauty that we find the universe exemplifying better than the theory that the universe was designed? And so as we look at this, we could say, without even looking at the outline, we just think about it here. Does it have to be beautiful? Does the universe have to be beautiful? Could it be ugly? If someone is saying that natural causes produced this universe, could that universe, based on natural causes, produce an ugly universe? There's no reason why it couldn't. It would seem that if it's just a bunch of random forces acting upon matter, pushing matter around, causing electrochemical reactions here and there, explosions here and there, wouldn't it seem that the universe could wind up being ugly? Yeah, that is very valid. It's very reasonable to conclude an ugly universe could be the case. Now, why is this important? Because when someone says it's physically necessary that the universe became beautiful, that doesn't work. It's a contradictory thing. The universe's beauty is contingent. It didn't have to be this way. It could have been otherwise. So someone cannot claim that it's necessary that natural causes produced a beautiful universe. So contingency is the opposite of necessity. So if something is contingent, it can't be necessary. So therefore, the necessity hypothesis is ruled out. Okay, then what else does the naturalist have? The naturalist has chance. So based on natural forces, chance could have produced a universe that's transparent and beautiful. Well, that doesn't seem to work quite well, because we find beauty and transparency all over the universe. We see the depths of the universe as far as we can see, and we see beauty there. And we can understand the depths of the universe. We can do all sorts of different things. We've looked at the cosmic background radiation in the deepest parts of the universe. So we've been able to examine and understand it. It's been intelligible to us all over the universe, not just on planet Earth, but all over the universe. It's been transparent to us. It's not opaque. The deeper we see, the more we know. So it's definitely not opaque. And it's beautiful. The deeper we see, the more beauty we find. So it doesn't seem likely to conclude that chance is the best explanation, because it's possible that random natural processes could have produced a transparent and beautiful universe everywhere, but it's highly unlikely. So if you go to page 17, and look at the first thing at the top in 5, I'm saying, so it is possible but highly improbable that transparency and beauty is caused by natural processes as it is exemplified everywhere. And thus the chances of transparency and beauty happening all over the universe are extremely low. It's highly likely that some parts would be ugly and some parts would be beautiful. In fact, if just 1%, less than 1% is ugly and 99% of it is beautiful, then it's most likely the case that this was not produced by chance. Because if chance caused it, we would expect to find, say, 30% ugliness, 70% beauty, or something like that, 50-50, or 90 ugly, 10% beautiful, something like that. But no, we find beauty everywhere. So the lower the probability of a cause producing an effect, the less that explanation satisfies. So it's because chance producing beauty everywhere is so improbable, then the chance hypothesis fails. So far, out of the options available to us, we have physical necessity as being invalid. We have chance is possible, but highly improbable. And then we have intelligent design as the best answer. And then we could talk about that and how that makes sense. Why don't we do that real quick and then we'll just conclude. So middle of page 17, intelligent design. Transparency and beauty in the universe points towards intelligence and design. Intelligent design makes sense of transparency, comprehensibility, and rational intelligibility. That's what it is. And beauty. Intelligent design makes sense of these things. 3, it seems that one can infer that transparency, I'm kind of defining it again there, and beauty, something objectively recognizable, found in the universe, are grounded in the nature of a transparent and beautiful mind that created them. Okay? So, if you find beauty and transparency in the universe, it most likely came from a beautiful and transparent mind. That's kind of the suggested conclusion, if you will. This is where it's pointing us to. So in other words, if I go and find a beautiful painting in an art gallery, I'm going to be led to the conclusion that a mind that thinks beautifully and is intelligible or is intelligent created that painting. That's kind of the point of that. So on the last page here, physics and the real universe, which physics describes, can be traced to an originating intelligence that created both the universe and the mind to know it. So we could trace it all back to a mind. An originating intelligence of the beauty and of the transparency. Now 5, if the Christian worldview were true, if God does exist, God created the world, these sort of Christian doctrines, we would expect to see God create a beautiful universe endowed with all sorts of amazing properties. Because God is said to be beautiful. God is said to be amazing. Now, what do we find when we go observe the universe? Exactly that. A beautiful universe endowed with all sorts of amazing properties. That is, if you say it again, if God exists like the Bible says he does, and if God has these attributes that theologians says he has, beauty, order, truth, goodness, that sort of stuff, it would be reasonable to conclude that what he creates is also beautiful, ordered, truthful, good, that sort of thing. And when we go examine the universe and we go do observations of the earth and universe, we find order, we find beauty, we find a good creation. And so it's evidence for God as being the originator. That is, the beauty we see in item 8 is evidence of what the Christian worldview predicts. The Christian worldview predicts that we would find when we go looking beauty, order, transparency, that's this sort of stuff. So 9, this satisfaction of the prediction lends additional credibility to the idea that the Christian worldview describes reality accurately. So this prediction lends the support and credibility to this position that we hold. And the fact that it describes reality accurately. Now, to conclude all this, we can say that chance and physical necessity explanations are inadequate to explain the transparency and beauty of the universe when compared to intelligent design, and thus one could conclude that based on comparative explanations, that intelligent design is the best explanation. So that is kind of, in a nutshell, that entire argument from physics, if you will, or the fact that classical physics helps show off the universe as being a result of a divine mind. Now, like I said initially, it doesn't have the same compelling thrust as maybe the cell's complexity that we saw. And like, wow, that really shows that a mind was involved. It had to be involved. And the same would be true when we'll see this argument coming up here, that it's much stronger too. But it's interesting that this can be in our bag of tricks. We can definitely put this in because it is helpful. And it's nice to know that not just chemistry and biology and astrophysics lend support to the idea that God exists and is a designer, but also physics. So what we see in our everyday life. Are there any questions on that before we move on to this entirely different topic? Does anybody have any feedback on that argument? And again, I would present it, but I wouldn't use it as my, final punch, if you will, my knockout punch. I would use it maybe to kind of start, maybe, or throw it in the conversation. Does anybody like it or not like it? Or do you find it helpful? Do you find it really convincing? No, not for you. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I find it convincing to the point that their intelligent design is more likely than random chance. I'm not sure how good of an argument it is necessarily that it points to a Christian worldview of God necessarily.
Okay, that's a very good observation. Now, I wouldn't say that it's pointing to the Christian worldview. So we have to be careful there. And that's a great point. And thank you for bringing that up, because it's pointing to an intelligent designer. Now that's very different, like we talked about before a few weeks ago in the class. You have, from intelligent design, all these other myriad of options, including aliens, polytheism. Do you remember that conversation? That those are the implications of intelligent design. Now what I'm saying here at the end, though, is that it lends credibility, additional credibility, to the idea that the Christian worldview describes reality accurately. That's a little different. So I just want to make us understand that. We have to be careful with how we word stuff, because if we word stuff wrong in our conversations, we're going to get run over with a truck. So again, your terminology has to be defined well. How you word your sentences is very important. Yes, ma'am. But thank you for that That's a great observation.
I thought the part that was powerful was the fact that we have eyes, but we don't need to have eyes. We have eyes, and that creates an ability we don't need to have. It's like it's there just to make it extra happy. I don't know, those words.
Yeah.
That's what I'm reading when you're talking about it. I thought it was very interesting and powerful.
So your feedback would be that the fact that we can visually be pleased by the beauty is this extra benefit that didn't have to be that way. Yeah.
It's not the kind of thing that would make sense evolutionally.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we evolve to have eyes? And why would things evolve to be beautiful?
Yeah. That's good. And we talked...
Some kind of coincidence? Or is it...
Yes, that's good. It's a good observation. We talked a little bit about that, so I'm glad you're bringing that up. Yes?
We talked about that, the save, and combination.
Yeah.
Chance of having that combination the first time.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about beauty versus an unbelief.
Yeah.
There's a chance of 99%.
Right.
You as opposed to.
Right. That's a really good observation, Steve, because like we talked about how the chance of something happening of one functional protein forming was 10 to the 164th power, extremely low probabilities. And the fact that 99% you could say of the universe is beautiful as a whole, I mean, what are the chances of producing a beautiful universe everywhere? I mean, it's well beyond that. So that's an interesting point, yeah. This is really good feedback to hear this from the class.
What you just said, so maybe help me a little bit more, but, or like, I guess that's the right argument, but I guess you could look at the other planets and say they're not as beautiful as, I mean, they're fascinating as a whole, or the pictures of everything in the universe, but if you zoom in at Mars, I mean, so far I haven't seen anything that looks as amazing as Earth.
Yeah.
So again, with the chance thing, then that kind of, I like thinking of it like that, I guess.
Yes, yeah. That's a good observation.
Like Sarah would say, seems like a hard issue. Like you could bring this up and say the thing about the eyes or whatever to try to tug on someone's heart, but I don't really. I like that you've been all about facts rather than specifically all human information to me. So I guess I like the facts, and to me this is more like the heart. And you know I love psychology.
Yeah.
I have a problem with psychology, but in this field, I guess I do.
Yeah, I hear you, and I appreciate that. And I think that's why I wanted to put the disclaimer out there that this isn't necessarily the strongest argument we've got. And so you don't necessarily want to use this all the time. But, or even for your own, we've talked about our own, strengthening our own faith. Like, we don't necessarily have to dwell on this one a lot, but it's helpful. You know, it's something to throw in to something that enhances our own faith when we consider the world and the physics, the equations of physics. I mean, it's really interesting to think of math as so helpful to us. It really is. Well, I appreciate the feedback because it helps to process this as we go. You know, I don't think we've done enough of that. So thank you for processing with me. Now, if you go to the next outline, y'all have it there, the big picture of space. So this is when this photo, Steve took this photo actually when he was on the other side of Pluto there. Thank you for that, Steve. Appreciate that. So you're really a servant of the Lord to do that for us. Now, let's get into this with the time we have left. See how far we can go, okay? Okay, now in terms of the spread of human existence across time, when we think of how long humans have been around for, only just recently have we been able to see the details of what the universe has been showing this whole time. Well, we already talked about the privileged planet a little bit. So this is kind of along that same line of thought. Those alive right now, at this moment in history, are alive at a time when we can finally see the universe transparently and know the cosmos beyond the mythical projections of primitive cultures. And the physics we have at our disposal have allowed this, like we just discussed. Now, the initial conditions of the universe at the event of the Big Bang were so precise that and perfect that certain features would obtain. This is called the fine-tuning of the universe. So when we talk about fine-tuning, you could think of the timing of a car. So you have cylinders, pistons firing in cylinders in your car engine. If they're not timed to fire correctly at the right sequence, then your car is going to be off. Its timing is going to be off, and you're going to need to have your timing belt adjusted, for instance. It needs to get tuned up. So we say we take our car for a tune-up. So things could be sequenced so precisely that we'll have optimized performance of our engine, right? We use these terms. Now think of a guitar. When you have a guitar, you want to tune it, right? We use the word tuning there. We tune it up almost every time we pick it up. Why? Because if you set the guitar down, just for a moment, it hits the ground or something, it's easy for it to go out of tune. We want optimal tuning. We want optimal performance. We want perfect harmony. Perfect. Why? Because we notice, usually, especially for the trained ear, we notice imperfection. It comes across as dissonance. Something's not right. So if you're a composer, or if you've been around music for a while, you start to pick up on things that aren't precise. Maybe if you're a barista and you've been making coffee forever, you can pick up on the coffee being slightly wrong, something slightly off. Too much water, too much whatever. I have some friends with very fine taste like that. A barista has been doing this for years. He competed nationally. I guess there's a competition, you know. But if you go back to the guitar example, if I have a guitar at my house, I used to play when I was, a teen and stuff, and I put it down. I haven't picked it up for like 4 years, right? The thing's been sitting there and collecting dust. It's bad. I know if I pick that guitar up, it will sound terrible. The guitar strings just loosen, and the guitars, especially by a cheap guitar that doesn't hold the levers, don't hold the strings tight. This stuff happens all the time. We always are talking about finely tuned stuff in our world. We need it to be that way because if it's not finely tuned, there's dissonance. We notice it. Now, if you turn the page, think of that and go to item 4 there, page 2. It's the same thing with the universe. The physics mentioned before, that we talked about earlier, must be in place for a tuning to the key of life. If you use the guitar analogy, it has to be tuned to the right key, if you will. Without this tuning, other features would clash and thus create conditions where life is unbearable or impossible. So even the slightest difference that could be there could be in the universe in terms of its features that would allow for life, a small difference would not allow for life. So it's not that there's just dissonance, we hear it and we feel uncomfortable. We're talking about no life could form. Even with the slight, if this tuning is slightly off, just like a guitar. Okay? So it seems as if the universe and earth were finely tuned. I'm using these words finely tuned for a reason, so remember those. You can circle them, you can underline them. Finely tuned, every time you see those words, circle them. Finely tuned for a perfect setting. It was tuned to be in perfect resonance and harmony with all other interacting phenomena, like other instruments in a concert, for instance. So, if you have Gabby playing the piano, Mark playing the violin, Steve's on the tuba, drums, okay, something like this. If all of these things were slightly off, if one of them was slightly off, the composer or the conductor would notice it. He would say, hey, fix your stuff, get your act together. So it's the same thing with the universe. Let's see. And the same thing, okay, if you think of guitar tuner, if you buy a cheap guitar tuner, something for like $5 at Guitar Center, you're not going to get a perfect tuning, even though it says you're right on the perfect key. Because you need to buy an expensive tuner. Why? Because they have greater instrumentation to show you that you're still off. and you need to keep tuning. So it's very important. So as we will see, the precision of the tuning of each and every feature of the universe is very incredible. So we need to have every aspect of the universe's features just right for us to be here for life. So when we talk about a fine-tuned universe, we're saying that the universe has a large number of parameters with values and observed features that are finely tuned to accommodate life. So if everybody is a player in the orchestra at a concert, then you all have to play perfectly for life to form, if you will. Okay? So that's the same thing with the universe. There's all these little parameters, and if one of them is slightly off, the conductor's going to notice. And essentially, if you follow it through, there's no life. Okay? Now, cosmological constants are one way to think about this. Now, what is that? These cosmological constants are the actual values assumed by the constants, the actual values assumed by the constants are such that small deviations from those values would render the universe life prohibiting. So the actual values of the constants could have been otherwise. That is, these are contingent features of the universe, and they are not necessary. We talked about contingency and necessity. So the cosmological constants are contingent. They could have been anything. They could have been different, say 1% higher, or say 5,000% lower than what they are. So what do I mean by that? Well, here's an example, the gravitational constant. If the gravitation constant were slightly larger, say 1%, stars would be too hot and burn too quickly for life to form. Okay, that's bad. If slightly smaller, stars would be too cool to produce nuclear fusion, which would prevent the production of heavy elements necessary for life. So if they're slightly larger, slightly smaller, bad things happen, life doesn't happen. That's an example of a cosmological constant. It has some value. It has some certain number. So when we talk about equations, do you remember this one from earlier? Well, let's suppose the actual equation was F equals ma plus 6, the number 6, okay? This is like the cosmological constant. So when cosmologists kind of describe the equations of the universe with physics, they need constants like this sometimes in their equations. Or they discover certain things have this rate of change, if you will. Like, say, 6 meters per second squared, something like that. And this is a bad equation because the units don't work out, but you get the idea, is that there's a certain number sometimes that they discover. They discovered this number. Okay, that's very important. If this number was 6.1, for instance, life would be impossible. If it was 5.9, life would be impossible. This is the idea with cosmological constants. Has anybody heard of this before? Okay, a couple of us. Now, isotropy is another example. This is the idea of uniform matter and antimatter in space. Velocity of light is another example. This has to do with the amount of radiation. Okay, too much radiation is bad. Not enough is bad. You know, it has to be just right. The electromagnetic force, we talked about that last time. You know, equations of physics, electromagnetism has to do with chemical bonding. If you don't have a certain force, let's say a certain number that they actually discovered, if it wasn't that number, that exact number, then you wouldn't have chemicals bonding to each other. There wouldn't be an ability for chemicals to bond. And that's bad because we need chemicals to bond, right? The strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, this has to do with atom and element building. So again, forces of chemistry. And the expansion rate of the universe has to influences galaxy and star formation. So if you think about this, a life-bearing universe should not expand too rapidly or too slowly. The universe, we find, has been expanding at a rate that was greater than the acceleration of gravity, but not at a rate so fast that the planets would not orbit around stars and receive heat. Okay, so do you get that? So if the universe is expanding, which is predicted by the standard Big Bang model, which the majority of scientists hold, and let's say, for instance, we hold that just for the sake of argument. So here's, let's say, the Big Bang, and it's just kind of blowing up. Now, I'm using this, it's a crude example. This is not really what happened in the Big Bang, but it's kind of like what happened, okay? So just flow with me. Just for your own thought, if you hear about the Big Bang, no, it's a little different than maybe just this explosion. There's something else going on. But for now, let's say Big Bang happens. If things are expanding or accelerating, not greater than the acceleration of gravity, which is g on Earth, it's say g is 9.8 meters per second squared. If, let's just say that's the same gravitational rate in the universe, if this acceleration is less than that, then what's going to happen? These are going to be gravitationally attracted back to itself, and you're not going to get a universe. That's not good. We need a universe. So that's if A is less than g, if the acceleration rate at the Big Bang. Now, if A is too much greater than g, let's say way greater than g, or slightly, I think even slightly greater than g. Oh, this is for galaxies to form, like our solar system, like the Milky Way galaxy. We need a sun, we need planets, we need orbits, that sort of stuff. We need some sort of g, but not much greater than g. So we need it to be just slightly greater than g, but not much greater than g. And that way these things expand, and eventually they kind of have the ability to form little galaxies and solar systems. If it was too much greater than g, then it wouldn't let these things coalesce and gravitationally attract to each other. They would have to keep going, and you never get a solar system. You never get planets orbiting a sun, a star. So that's the idea with that. Now, again, you have the mass density of the universe. This is related to the idea of expansion and crunch of the universe. Now, these are just 7 of the cosmological constants. Now, there's a guy, he's an astrophysicist. His name is Hugh Ross. Now, Hugh Ross has spent a lot of time working on stuff like this. He's documented 140 cosmological constants. We've just talked about 7 just now. He's documented 140 of these parameters. That is, if any of these 140 cosmological constants of the universe were slightly different, life would be impossible. So now we're just talking about numbers here. We're just talking about numbers. And Hugh Ross says there's not just 8, there's 140 of these. If any one of these would be slightly different, life would be impossible. So 140, that's a big deal. Okay? Now, the observed features of the universe and planet. Let's quickly talk about that. Now, the same guy, Ross, individually describes the effects of varying any single observed feature of the universe or feature of the Earth. He describes 402 observed features of the universe and our planet, such as the distance from a parent star magnetic field, date of star formation, shutdown in the galaxy, amount of buildup of heavy elements in the galaxy, flux of cosmic ray protons, rate of atmospheric dust deposition into the oceans, quantity of sulfur, etc. So he's just documenting all of these features. Okay, we were talking about numbers, now we're just talking about relationships, if you will. And he's documented 402. If any of these 402 were different, we wouldn't have a planet capable of sustaining life based on its a planet's relationship to other features of the universe. So again, you have a lot of these relationships that have to be intact for a planet to even be there that could have life on it. Now, Hugh Ross, by the way, has spent 30 years or so documenting this stuff, this astrophysics guy. And he's just awesome. And I have a couple of his books back there. He's a Christian. And based on all of these cosmological constants that he's documented and 402 features of the universe, he has concluded easily that God has caused it all. That design is the best explanation. Now, if we do one more kind of feature of the Earth, let's talk about the Earth itself. We have a very unique Earth. It's extremely unique. Our planet is still very unique, even though over 600 extrasolar planets have been discovered. So there's a lot of planets out there, right? Considering our relationship to the Sun, only 10% or more of Sun-like stars that are out there could even support planetary systems. Okay? So of all the stars that could be out there, only 10% could support planetary systems. So we have a very unique position next to a life-supporting star. That's pretty good. We need a life-supporting star for us to be here. And the best planet to be on is ours, because it's the only one with the right life-sustaining features. The only one we know of. Nothing even comes close in terms of what we've observed out there. The distance from the Sun, temperature ranges are perfect for life. So the distance from the Sun gives us good temperature ranges. The size and gravity of the planet, the water cycle, vapor, liquid, solid, the thickness of the planet's crust, the rotation rate of the planet, the axial tilt, giving us seasons, the magnetic field, the moon, the atmospheric pressure and composition, and we can go on and on and on and talk about all these amazing features of our planet that cause life to be permissible. Again, different features of our Earth would make life impossible. If just a few of these things are wrong or off, we wouldn't have a life-supporting planet. So what we're doing here is we're setting out a bunch of pieces of evidence, and we're saying, here, look at all this evidence about the universe, about the Earth. What best explains this? Do you think physical necessity and chance and natural causes could explain this? Or is a divine mind required? And that's what we'll look at next time. So I'm kind of whetting your appetite here by introducing you to cosmological constants and talking about the features of the universe and features of the Earth. And so when we meet again, we're going to look at whether or not chance, the chance hypothesis is a good one. What can chance do for us if we want to use that as an explanation? And then we're going to look at physical necessity, and is that helpful at all? And then we're going to look at design. And then after that, we're going to talk about alternative explanations of the universe. The multiverse, black hole-created universes, the Stephen Hawking's boundless, finite universe, meaning there's no singularity, there's no Big Bang. So all of these alternative explanations beyond chance and beyond physical necessity, which have been our only two thus far, all of these other ones we can add to the list of natural causes that could explain the universe. Now, how does design compare with all of those, not just physical necessity and chance? Can design still win, if you will? And we're going to see that it does. So we're going to create this really powerful case. We're going to give them all their options and see how they work out. Next class. Any questions on this so far?
Really, just quick answer. I think it's a good question. But what most naturalists hold to when it comes to those theories?
It's varied, to be honest. Yeah, there's not a single physical necessity, chance, and then there's like 6 other ones. Multiverse, black hole created universe, that stuff. It's varied. But mostly they would hold to a standard Big Bang model. And then this was created by quantum fluctuations in the vacuum and infinite heat and infinite density causing this, which they're going to say is just naturally caused.
Just sitting in
Yeah, these natural, and so we'll talk about that next class. But what's getting more attention lately is the multiverse and the infinite universe model. So this kind of goes back to the original idea many had before the standard Big Bang model came about, that the universe is eternal, that it never had a beginning. And this is gaining ground in the scientific academic community because of the Christian apologists who have set out the argument that if the universe began, it must have had a cause. And whatever has a cause, or the agent is the first cause. Yeah, the unmoved mover, as Aristotle put it. So because of the advances in Christian apologetics in the last 30 years, many are now backtracking from what was hailed as this wonderful theory that showed that naturalistic causes could have given rise to our universe, so you don't need a creator. But now they're saying, no, okay, Christian apologists, you're right. We have another view. And so they're saying that the universe is now infinite again, and that there's multiverses. So we'll get into that. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a good question. So the idea is that they're not what was once their pride and joy. We've finally figured it out. Now is being kind of rejected for these alternative theories, which I just mentioned: multiverse, black hole created universes, and boundless finite universe. So. It's really intriguing. Now that we have a lot of competing theories, what does the Christian do? What do we do now? How can we conclude design is still the case? Yes?
The number C, relationship to the sun, only 10% of the stars could each support planetary system.
Yeah.
What are the implications?
Well, that's just initially because of the star's size and radiation and heat, all that. They're just saying that just off the cuff, like just initially, if you don't have the right size star, there's no way you're going to get life. And they're saying that all these other stars, only 10% of them are even remotely close to the size of ours. So just and our relationship to it. So like the heat and the radiation, it's all like initially, just like boom, 10% of, only 90% of them are thrown out. So there's only 10% couldn't be like us at all. So that's just a real quick thing, but there's a lot more to it.
With his question, is that saying that only 10% of the stars can support a planetary system similar to our own? Because you're saying that has to do with radiation and things like that. Is it possible there would be beings that could deal with that type of radiation or that type of coldness or temperature change? Or is that also be taken into account with that?
I think like an alien creature or something.
Yeah.
Okay. I think not, because just by this criteria alone, just to narrow it down to 10%, now it's a lot less than that, to be honest. Once you start looking at all these features, it's like 10 to the negative, 400th power that we would get these conditions anywhere else in the universe. But just on this criteria alone, just to get it down to 10%, no, you would have to have, because something that has to have life has to have nutrition, and nutrition has to be, food of some sort on any planet. And so it would be hard, and I don't think any astrobiologist is what they're called, would conclude that that a bigger star would have the right amount of radiation. They would probably say it's just too much for even an alien creature. Yeah. So astrobiology is a big field now. It's a hot topic in the cosmological community. There's a whole journal called Astrobiology now. So it's kind of a big enterprise of research. But I'm not quite sure on that, so I'm not the expert, so I'll let them answer for you. But my initial answer is probably not. They would probably conclude that anything bigger than ours is too much, or a planet. I mean, for instance, if you got a bigger sun and you're like out there at Saturn, then yeah. So it's all about how big it is in our relationship to it, and that's what they're saying is they're throwing out 90% of them. Yeah. So, okay, why don't we close at this point? And if anyone has any questions, like Rachel, okay, then we can pick it up in a couple weeks. So no class next week. And if you think about me, keep me in prayer for the talk in Florida. We'll be talking about criticisms of evolution over there. So it should be good. Okay, so let's pray. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for tonight and learning about physics and astrophysics. We are just initially amazed, just in talking about some of these things tonight, at how interesting and intriguing our universe is. And we thank you so much for who you are and that you created it to be interesting and intriguing because you are that way. And we see you being revealed to us through the universe and its beauty. So thank you for everything, and we pray that you bless us this week as we celebrate the life of your Son and the resurrection. We pray that you would give us the resurrection power that was spoken about in the New Testament, and let it be a continued part of our year. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you.